Witam Państwa serdecznie, Błażej Hrapkowicz. Trwa 24. edycja festiwalu Camerimage w Bydgoszczy. Our guest today is the recipient of Lifetime Achievement Award, Michael Chapman. Hello, how are you? You have worked with some of the great directors in the history of cinema, but yet I read that you became a cinematographer somehow accidentally, and I'm wondering, how do you stumble upon doing something like that? How do you stumble upon becoming a cinematographer?
I stumbled on becoming a cinematographer because I fell in love with and married a girl I had known in college. And her father was a French emigre cinematographer in New York. And he didn't like the idea that his daughter should be married to a man who was a freight brakeman on the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad, which is what I was. That being, in those days, there's no way you should know this, but in the late 50s in New York, that was a very hip job because of the beatniks and Jack Kerouac and all that. So,
Allen Ginsberg and so on.
Yeah, and all of those things. So being a brakeman was a very hip job, plus it paid pretty well. But poor Joe Brun didn't think that it was a very good idea that his daughter should be married to a freight brakeman on the railroad.
That's an excellent combination, hip job and it pays well.
Yeah, but but I couldn't explain that to Joe. So anyway, he said, why don't I get you into the movie business? And I said yes, because I realized I didn't want to be a freight brakeman for the rest of my life. I didn't want to be hip for the rest of my life, for that matter. So I started out, just as an ordinary job. I mean, carrying heavy boxes and loading magazines and all that sort of thing. And I worked my way up from that to focus puller, and then to operator, and then to lighting. It just happened. It went along the way, and along the way, I mean, I had boring, pretentious things that I was going to be a beatnik poet, and I was hanging out on the fringes of the art world in New York. But I realized slowly that the art form that I was meant for was cinema. Mm-hmm. And there I was.
You mentioned several times that your mentor was Gordon Willis,
yes.
And he was one of the greatest American cinematographers.
One of the very greatest.
The Godfather and many other films he did, not only with Coppola. What do you think now, from the perspective you have, what was the most important thing you learned from him?
I think the most important thing to learn from Gordy was not his lighting, which only he could do. He had an amazing eye, which almost no one else has. I mean, he could just make distinctions that are way beyond my poor efforts. But it was how passionately important it all was to be focused on that, and that you had to take it entirely seriously. What I learned from Gordy was kind of everything, just everything about being absorbed into the function of being a cinematographer.
Your most famous, possibly, collaboration is, of course, with Martin Scorsese, with Raging Bull and so on. But what I'm interested in is, I think your first film you did as a director of photography, if I'm not mistaken, The Last Detail, mm-hmm. by Hal Ashby, because he's one of my favorite directors of all time, and I love this film. So can you tell us a bit about working with Hal Ashby on that picture?
Again, that was one of those things that just happened. We had done a movie before that with Hal Ashby, which Gordy lit and I operated, called The Landlord, which was in New York. And Hal was coming back to the East Coast to do Last Detail. And in those days, the unions were divided between Hollywood and New York. And if you were in the territory of New York, you had to use New York people. And Gordy, by then, this was after The Godfather, and Gordy had become a huge star, and he was busy and he couldn't come back and do it. And they wanted Haskell Wexler to do it, but he didn't have a card on the East Coast. So, faute de mieux, they used me. Hal knew me from Landlord, and he knew that I was a really good operator, and that I was not, overwhelmingly stupid. So I guess, and I'm sure Gordy said, "Oh, go ahead, give Chappie a chance," or something. Though I never figured that one out. I never found out. So they hired me, and I mean, I was terrified, but and excited at the same time, of course. I mean, it was a movie with a script by Robert Towne and starring Jack Nicholson, and here I was with no experience as a DP, except maybe a couple of commercials. And so they hired me and I did it.
Hal Ashby had a great ability to portray very original human relationships, which were sometimes, in Harold and Maude, for example, outrageous on the surface, but very deep and emotional behind, deep down. And in The Last Detail, the relationship between the characters is also unorthodox, to say the least.
It is.
Is it a particularly great challenge for the cinematographer to try to capture this kind of emotion between people?
I think that the job of the cinematographer, certainly in Last Detail, the job of the cinematographer was to not get in the way of that relationship and let the actors and the director find it and to give them a world in which they could do it. And I, fortunately, very quickly figured out that the way to do it in this case was to not do it, was to not light it, was to not get in the way at all, was to just let them live in this crummy, vagrant world that they were going through, you know, from Newport News, Virginia, where the Navy base was, up to the prison in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And it's a road movie, and in a road movie you don't want to, you know, make fabulous lighting and all kinds of crap like that. You want to not get in the way, and that's what I tried to do, was not get in the way.
You mentioned that you said famously that the camera operator job is the job which combines athleticism with aesthetics.
Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful job. And you said, I said, I guess, it mixes athleticism and aesthetics together at 24 frames a second. It's a heavenly job. And I was actually, I never mind my DP work, but I was a really good operator. I'm very proud of my operating. A lot of my early movies I operated myself. You weren't supposed to, and the unions were very angry about it, but we would hire an operator, and then we would just tell them to go in the trailer and drink beer and shut up, and they would, and I would operate myself. And if you operate yourself and you are very good at operating, so you don't have to be consciously worried about it, it's a wonderful way to see your lighting and see the framing and everything. It's a wonderful way to see if you're doing it well. So I did it myself, almost all of, in fact, I think all of Last Detail I operated.
Thank you very much.
Please.